He leaned back in his chair, a small smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, and I could see in his eyes that he thought he had already won. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to taste. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, my expression calm and unreadable. But inside I was almost amused, because even now he had no idea that I wasn't even in the game he thought he was playing. The meeting was supposed to be a formality, a chance for him to lay out his so-called final terms. He spoke in that slow, measured way of his voice dripping with a confidence that was meant to impress everyone else in the room. You see, he said his tone so smooth it almost sounded kind. "This is how it ends. For you, anyway." I watched him carefully, my face still. He was so sure of himself, so convinced that every move I made had been in response to him, that I had spent all this time chasing the same prize he held so tightly in his hand. But he was wrong. He didn't know that I had never been playing to win what he wanted, because I didn't want it. Around the table, a few people shifted uncomfortably. They could feel the power he thought he held, the sharp edge of his words cutting through the air. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Because I knew something he didn't. This wasn't my fight, and I wasn't about to let him drag me into it. "Are you even listening to me?" he said, leaning forward slightly. His voice had an edge to it now, a note of irritation creeping in. I met his gaze, calm and steady. "I hear you," I said softly. "I just don't agree." He laughed, then a short, sharp sound that made the others at the table glance nervously at one another. "Of course you don't," he said. "You never did understand what this was really about." I tilted my head slightly, my expression thoughtful. "Maybe I said. Or maybe you never understood that I didn't want what you were offering." His smirk faltered for just a moment, the flicker of confusion in his eyes almost imperceptible. But I saw it, and it was enough. The meeting ended with him feeling triumphant, his voice full of finality as he dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "I think we're done here," he said. "You're free to go." And I stood calm and composed, and walked out of that room with my head held high. Outside, the air was cool and fresh, the early spring breeze carrying the scent of rain. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it wash over me. In the quiet of that moment, I felt something settle inside me, a certainty that had nothing to do with him or his games. He thought he had beaten me, but what he didn't know was that I had never even been playing. As I walked down the street, the city alive with the low hum of traffic and the chatter of people going about their lives, I let the memory of his words slip away like water. I thought about all the times he had tried to draw me into his world, to make me believe that his game was the only one that mattered. And I thought about how for so long I had let him, but not anymore. At home, I sat in the small living room with a cup of tea, the steam curling in the quiet light of the late afternoon. I thought about the way he had looked at me across that table, so sure that he had finally broken me, and I realized that he didn't even know who I was anymore. Maybe he never had. I let out a slow breath, the warmth of the tea steady in my hands. For so long, I had measured my worth by how well I could keep up with his demands, how quietly I could take his dismissals. But in that meeting, I had seen it clearly. For the first time, he wasn't the one I needed to prove anything to. I had nothing to prove to him, or to anyone else who had ever looked at me and thought I was small, because I wasn't. That night, I lay in bed with the window open, the soft rush of wind carrying the scent of rain and earth. I let the darkness settle around me like a comfort, my thoughts quiet and calm. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew he would try to pull me back into his game, to make me doubt the quiet strength I had found. But I also knew that I was done letting him decide the rules. I whispered into the darkness he thought he won, but he never even knew I wasn't playing. And in that whisper, I felt the first real taste of freedom. The next morning, I woke with the dawn, the world outside washed clean by the night's rain. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. I thought about everything he had said, the way he had tried to make me feel small. And I thought about how, for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of his words, because he had been so sure he was playing against me. But he didn't realize that I was never even in the game. This was just the beginning. The day after that meeting, the office hummed with the usual low chatter phones, ringing keyboards, clicking polite conversations drifting through the air. But for me, it felt like the world had shifted, like the ground beneath my feet was no longer the same. I moved through the hallways with a calm that surprised even me. No one knew what had happened behind those closed doors, the way he had tried to box me in with his words. And I had no intention of telling them, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. I packed up my desk slowly, each small motion deliberate. I didn't want to draw attention, didn't want the whispers or the questions. I just wanted to leave that place behind. The office had always felt like a battlefield, every conversation, a quiet war of who could hold the upper hand. I had played my part for too long, letting him believe he had won. But now I was done. A few coworkers paused at my desk, their eyes flicking curiously to the box I was filling. "Everything okay?" one of them asked, her voice soft. I gave her a small, polite smile. "I'm just moving on," I said simply. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Good for you," she said quietly. "You deserve more than this place." And in that simple kindness, I felt something inside me ease. When I walked out of the building for the last time, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I was leaving behind, a world built on half-truths, and power plays a game I had never really wanted to be part of. The air outside was cool and fresh, the sun breaking through the clouds in soft golden light. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of that final exit slip off my shoulders. At home, I unpacked my box of things, small reminders of the person I had been in that office, and the quiet promise of who I was becoming. A framed photo of a family vacation, a small glass paperweight that had always caught the light just right, a worn notebook filled with ideas I had never shared. Each piece felt like a thread, connecting me to the woman I had almost forgotten I was. I sat at my kitchen table, the late afternoon light warm and soft. I thought about the way he had looked at me in that final meeting, so sure of his victory. And I realized that what he saw as an end was really just my beginning. He thought he had closed the door on me, but he didn't know I was already building a new one somewhere else. The next morning, I woke early, the sky still pale and quiet. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, my notebook open in front of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Like I didn't have to measure my worth by how well I played his game. I wrote out my thoughts in careful, deliberate lines. I don't need to prove anything to him. My worth is not a prize to be won. The words felt final, like a quiet vow. And I knew that no matter what happened next, I wouldn't let anyone else decide my value ever again. I spent the day reaching out to old friends and new contacts, people who had seen the real me, who knew what I was capable of, without needing me to prove it. I didn't tell them the whole story of why I was leaving. I didn't need to. All I said was, "I'm ready for something new." And the doors began to open, one small opportunity after another, each one a quiet affirmation that I was on the right path. That evening, I sat in the small living room with a cup of tea, the soft glow of the lamp wrapping the space in gentle light. I thought about the life I had built around his expectations, the ways I had tried to fit into a mold that was never meant for me, and I thought about how free it felt to finally let it go. I knew there would be challenges ahead. The world didn't stop just because I decided to walk away from his game. But I also knew that I wasn't starting from nothing. I had everything I needed inside me: patience, resilience, and a quiet strength he had never bothered to look for. The phone rang once that night. His name flashed across the screen, a final echo of the world I was leaving behind. I watched it ring, the sound filling the quiet of the room. And then I let it go to voicemail. Because I didn't need to hear his voice anymore. I didn't need his validation or his explanations. I had already moved on. As the night settled in, I opened my window and let the cool breeze wash over me. I closed my eyes and whispered to the darkness, "I'm done playing your game." And in that quiet moment, I felt something shift inside me, a release, a small but certain light that told me I was exactly where I was meant to be. Because he thought he had won. He thought he had ended my story with a single meeting, a single smirk. But he didn't know that I was never even playing. This was my quiet exit, my first step into a world that was mine, to build free from the weight of his expectations. And as I turned off the light and let the darkness settle around me, I knew that this was just the beginning. The days that followed my quiet exit were some of the most peaceful I had known in years. Gone were the endless games of one-upmanship, the careful words I had always measured, so he wouldn't twist them against me. Now there was only the gentle rhythm of my own breath, the soft murmur of my thoughts, unhurried by the weight of his expectations. Each morning, I woke early, the sun still low in the sky, and brewed a pot of coffee that filled my small apartment with warmth. I sat by the window with my notebook open, letting the light of the new day wash over me. For the first time, the pages felt like a canvas, not a battlefield. I wrote down my thoughts, my ideas, my plans no longer shaped by the need to fit into the lines he had drawn for me. I started small, quiet research, careful listening, reaching out to voices I trusted. I didn't tell anyone the full story, didn't share the details of what had happened behind those closed doors. I didn't need to. The people who mattered didn't need an explanation. They only needed to know that I was ready to build something new. In the afternoons, I walked through the city with a quiet curiosity, seeing places I had passed 1,000 times, but never really noticed. A small bookstore with a crooked sign that made me smile. A coffee shop with soft jazz playing in the background. Parks where children's laughter drifted like music on the breeze. Each small discovery felt like a reminder that there was so much more to the world than the narrow space he had tried to keep me in. I spent my evenings reading, filling the quiet with the voices of people who had carved out their own paths. Their stories felt like lifelines, each one a reminder that worth isn't something you wait for someone else to hand you. It's something you claim step by quiet step. One night, I sat at my kitchen table, a candle flickering softly beside my notebook. I sketched out the first outlines of the project I had always wanted to create, the one I had never dared to share with him. It was just a seed of an idea, but it was mine. And in the soft light of that small flame, it felt alive. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be moments when doubt would slip in cold and sharp. But I also knew that I was done letting that doubt belong to him. If I was going to fail, it would be on my own terms, in pursuit of something that felt real and right, not in some game he had made up to keep me small. As the days turned into weeks, my quiet plan took shape. I reached out to mentors I had once been too timid to approach, their gentle encouragement, like a steady wind at my back. I read everything I could find on the things I wanted to master, my notebook, filling with the careful scrawl of ideas and questions. I let the slow, patient work of building become my anchor, no longer something to hide behind, but something to stand on. There were moments when his voice still tried to slip in those old doubts, like ghosts in the quiet of the night. But each time I reminded myself that those words weren't mine. They were his, and I didn't have to carry them anymore. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched the sunrise, I realized that I wasn't just making a plan. I was making a promise to myself, a promise that I would never again let someone else decide my worth, that I would never again play a game I didn't believe in. And in that quiet certainty, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I didn't need to announce what I was doing. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone else. The only voice that mattered was my own. The only measure of success was the quiet pride that settled in my chest each night when I looked at what I had built. One evening, I ran into an old colleague at the small coffee shop I had come to love. She looked surprised to see me there, her smile soft. "I heard you left," she said gently. "I'm glad. You always seemed trapped there." I nodded, a small smile of my own forming. "I was," I said, "but I'm not anymore." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes warm. "What's next for you?" she asked. And I took a slow breath, feeling the quiet strength of my plan settle around me like a cloak. "Something I've always wanted," I said simply. "Something that's mine." That night, I went home and wrote in my journal, I wasn't playing his game because I was already building my own. The words felt like a key turning in a lock, a door opening to a world that was mine alone. Because he thought he won. He thought I was done. But he didn't know that I was never even playing. And in the silence of my own heart, I knew that was the greatest freedom I had ever claimed. The first real sign that I was on the right path came on a rainy morning. The world outside was soft and gray, the steady patter of rain against the window, a gentle rhythm that matched the calm inside me. I had spent the last few weeks weaving the threads of my quiet plan, each small step a way of proving to myself that I didn't need his validation to move forward. That morning, I got an email, an invitation to speak at a small community event, one that brought together people who had quietly made a difference in their own corners of the world. The note was simple and kind. We've heard about your work, and we'd love for you to share your journey. I read those words twice, feeling the warmth of them settle into my chest. They didn't know the whole story, but they saw enough to know I had something worth listening to. I accepted the invitation with a quiet smile, my fingers steady on the keyboard. It wasn't about recognition. It was about finally being seen for what I had always known was there. My own quiet strength. The days that followed were busy but calm. I spent my mornings reading and refining my ideas, the small kitchen table covered in notes and sketches that felt more real with each passing day. In the afternoons, I met with people I trusted, mentors, friends, voices of calm, who reminded me that this journey was mine to shape. And in the evenings, I walked through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, the cool air filling my lungs with a sense of quiet possibility. I didn't rush. I didn't force the pieces to fit. Instead, I let them come together in their own time, each small step a reminder that I didn't need to play by anyone else's rules, that I was free to build something new, something true. One afternoon, as I sat in a small coffee shop working on my notes, I caught a glimpse of him through the window. He was walking quickly, his shoulders squared, and his gaze straight ahead, as if the world owed him an audience. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the flicker of confusion there, the faint question of why I wasn't where he had left me, still playing his game. But I didn't look away. I held his gaze for a heartbeat, calm and unafraid. And then I turned back to my notebook, the small smile on my lips saying everything I didn't need to say out loud. I'm not yours to measure anymore. As the weeks passed, the small successes began to add up. An idea that once felt like a dream became a real project, one that others began to notice and quietly respect. A message from an old colleague, I heard about what you're doing, it's inspiring. A friend who had always believed in me whispering, I always knew you had this in you. Each word a quiet affirmation that I wasn't just moving forward, I was becoming something more than I had ever allowed myself to be. But the greatest change wasn't in what others saw, it was in how I saw myself. I no longer measured my worth by how well I could keep up with his expectations. I no longer felt the need to prove that I could play his game better than he could. Because I had found something deeper, something stronger, the quiet certainty that I was enough just as I was. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the soft glow of the lamp and the steady hum of the city outside, I wrote in my journal, I am not the sum of his doubts. I am the sum of my quiet, patient strength. The words felt like a soft drumbeat in my chest, a rhythm I carried with me as I moved forward. He still tried to reach out sometimes, a call here, a message there. Each one carefully worded to sound concerned, to sound like he was only checking in. But I didn't answer. I didn't owe him anything. I had learned that silence was sometimes the loudest answer of all. One rainy evening, as I walked home from a meeting, I paused to watch the city lights flicker in the puddles on the sidewalk. I thought about all the ways he had tried to make me feel small, all the times he had spoken over me like my voice didn't matter. And I thought about how, for the first time, I didn't carry that weight anymore. I wasn't playing his game. I never had been. I was playing my own, and every quiet step I took was a way of saying that out loud, without ever having to raise my voice. At home, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, the soft hush of rain outside a gentle counterpoint to the steady hum of my thoughts. I let the warmth settle into my hands, let the quiet fill the spaces where his voice used to echo. And in that quiet, I found something I had never known I was missing: peace. Because he thought he won. He thought he had left me behind in the small, silent corner of the world he had carved out for me. But he didn't know that I had never belonged there, that I had never even been playing. And as I turned out the light and let the night wrap around me, I knew that this was only the beginning. The first real proof that my quiet work was turning into something tangible came on an early spring morning, the air fresh and sweet with the promise of new beginnings. I woke with the same quiet determination I carried every day, but that morning felt different, like something was about to shift. I sat by the window with my coffee, the soft light painting the world in gentle gold. My notebook was open in front of me, filled with pages of notes and dreams. I read over them slowly, each word a quiet reminder of how far I had come. And then, almost like an answer to that silent affirmation, my phone buzzed. It was an email, an invitation to present my project at a small conference for emerging voices. My breath caught in my chest as I read the words, "We've heard about your work and would love for you to share your ideas." I read it twice, my heart steady and sure. This wasn't just a meeting or a passing interest. It was a door opening, a sign that the world was starting to see me, not the shadow of who he had tried to make me, but the woman I was choosing to become. I said yes, of course. Not with fanfare or celebration, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided she was worthy. I spent the next few days preparing, carefully crafting slides that told a story, refining my words until they felt true and clear. I didn't tell anyone about the invitation at first. It felt like something sacred, something I wanted to hold close until I was ready to share it. When the day of the conference arrived, I woke early, my hands steady, as I dressed in simple, elegant clothes that made me feel strong. The conference hall was small, but warm, filled with people who had come not to compete, but to learn. I took a slow breath as I stood in front of the room, the quiet hum of anticipation, a gentle backdrop to the calm I carried inside me. As I spoke, I felt my voice steady and sure, no longer the careful words of someone trying to survive, but the clear, measured tones of someone who had something real to say. I talked about the small details that mattered, the quiet ways I had learned to build something steady and true. I didn't try to impress them. I just told my story honestly without apology. When I finished, there was a long, quiet moment before the room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was real. I felt the warmth of it settle in my chest, and for a moment I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. This was my first victory, small maybe in the eyes of the world, but for me, it was everything. After the presentation, a woman approached me with a soft smile. "Your words resonated with me," she said. "It's like you were telling my story too." I felt my throat tighten, but I smiled back. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than I can say." As I walked home that evening, the sun dipping low and turning the sky soft pink, I thought about how far I had come since that last meeting with him. How far I had come from the woman who had once measured her worth by his smirk and his approval. I knew he wouldn't understand this victory if he saw it. He would dismiss it, call it small or meaningless. But that didn't matter, because it wasn't his to measure. It was mine. I stopped at the little coffee shop I had grown to love, the soft jazz music and warm light, a gentle balm to the quiet ache in my chest. I ordered a cup of tea and sat by the window, letting the gentle murmur of conversation wrap around me. For the first time, I let myself smile, really smile, without worrying about who might see. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single line, "This is just the beginning," because I knew it was true. This first victory was small, but it was real. And it was only the first step in a journey that was mine to shape. At home that night, I sat by the window with the city lights glowing soft in the distance. I thought about all the quiet work that had brought me here, the small steps, the whispered affirmations, the nights spent alone, with only my own determination for company. And I felt a quiet pride settle into my bones, stronger than any applause could ever be. He had told me I would never succeed without him, that I would fade away without his games to keep me sharp. But he was wrong. Because I wasn't fading, I was becoming. I wrote one last line in my journal that night. He thought he won, but he didn't know I wasn't even playing. The words felt final, a quiet truth I would carry with me for the rest of my life. As I turned off the light and let the soft hush of the night wrap around me, I knew that this was just the first of many victories, each one a small flame burning bright in the quiet of my own heart. And I was ready for every single one of them. The glow of that first victory lingered like a gentle warmth in my chest. But it wasn't long before the world around me started to shift. Small signs of resistance of the old ways trying to creep back in began to appear in the cracks between the quiet triumphs. It started with a message from him. Just a few lines carefully crafted to sound casual, like he hadn't noticed how far I'd come. "I heard about your little project," he wrote. "Congratulations. I hope you're not getting ahead of yourself." I read the words twice, my heart steady. The old me would have read them over and over, searching for hidden meaning, wondering if there was something I needed to prove. But now I let them go with a quiet exhale. His voice no longer held the power to shake me. But it wasn't just him. Other voices, some familiar, some new, started to whisper the same tired doubts. "Are you sure this is the right path?" they asked gently. "Don't you think you're taking a risk?" I heard the worry in their words, the small undercurrent of doubt that always seemed to echo back to the same place. "Are you sure you're enough?" Each time I took a slow breath and let those questions settle before answering. "Yes," I would say, my voice calm and quiet. "I'm sure." And each time I said it, the words felt a little stronger in my mouth, a little more like the truth I had chosen for myself. Still, there were moments when the old fear tried to creep in. Late at night, when the world was soft and quiet, and my thoughts felt too loud, I would lie awake and wonder if maybe they were right. If maybe I was reaching for something too big, too far beyond the careful lines I had once been told to stay within. But in those moments, I would remember the soft applause in that small conference room, the way my voice had felt steady and sure as I shared my story, the quiet strength in every step I had taken since I walked away from his game. And I would whisper to myself in the darkness, "You're not small. You're not playing. You're building something real." At work, I started to see the small ways the resistance showed itself. A project I had been working on suddenly reassigned to someone else without explanation. A meeting I had been invited to quietly removed from my calendar. The small, subtle ways people try to remind you of your place when they're not ready to see you rise. But I didn't let it shake me. Instead, I let it strengthen the quiet promise I had made to myself that I would not let them decide my worth ever again. One afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop, my notebook open in front of me, when a former colleague slid into the chair across from me. "I heard about your talk," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "It's impressive, but are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked at him calmly, my fingers resting on the page where I had written the outline for my next project. "I'm not sure," I said, honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." He frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing, as if he was searching for the cracks in my calm. "You know he'll be watching, right?" he said quietly. "He doesn't like losing." I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "He can watch all he wants," I said softly. "I'm not playing his game. I'm building my own." The conversation ended there, but his words echoed in my mind as I walked home in the gentle dusk. I knew that he was right in his own way. I knew that the pushback would come, that the old voices would always try to reassert themselves when they felt threatened. But I also knew that I wasn't the same woman I had been before. And that was the only truth that mattered. At home that night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights soft in the distance. I thought about all the quiet victories I had already claimed, the small ways I had proved to myself that I was capable of more than surviving. And I realized that every bit of resistance I faced now was just another sign that I was no longer willing to be invisible. I wrote in my journal, "Let them doubt. Let them resist. Their fear is not my truth." The words felt solid in my chest, a quiet drumbeat of strength I carried with me into the darkness of the night. The next morning, I woke with the same quiet determination that had carried me this far. I brewed my coffee and opened my notebook, the soft light of dawn painting the pages in gold. I didn't know what would come next, what new whispers of doubt or subtle acts of sabotage I might face, but I knew that I was done letting them decide the shape of my story, because he thought he won. He thought that by pushing me out of his world, he could keep me small, but he didn't know that I was never even playing. And with every quiet step, I took every breath of determination in the face of their resistance. I was proving it to him, to the world, and most importantly, to myself. The days leading up to the launch of my project were filled with a quiet energy, a low, steady hum beneath my skin that reminded me I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had spent weeks preparing each small step, adding up to something real, something that felt like my own voice finally taking shape. The whispers of doubt and resistance still lingered at the edges, but they felt distant now, like echoes of an old world I had already left behind. In their place was a growing certainty, a quiet pride that steadied my hands and calmed my breath. On the morning of the launch, I woke before dawn, the city outside still wrapped in the soft hush of early morning. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, my notebook open in front of me. I read through the final notes I had written, the careful words and quiet affirmations that had guided me here, and I whispered them to myself one last time. You're not small. You're not playing. You're building. The event was small, just a modest gathering in a community space, a handful of people who had come to see what I had built. But as I stood in front of them, I felt the quiet power of the moment settle into my bones. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I wasn't here to prove anything to him. I was here because I believed in what I had created. As I spoke, I felt the words flow from me, with a calm I hadn't known I was capable of. I talked about the why behind my work, the small details that mattered, the quiet truths I had learned in the long, patient hours of building. I saw the way people leaned in their eyes, warm and focused, and I felt the first real taste of what it meant to be heard on my own terms. When I finished, there was a pause, soft, expectant. And then the room erupted in gentle applause, the sound wrapping around me like a balm. I felt a small smile tug at my lips, not the careful, practiced smile I had worn in his world, but a real quiet joy that settled deep in my chest. Afterward, people came up to me in small clusters, their words warm and genuine. "This is something special," one person said. "You've created something that matters." Another added softly, "You've given a voice to things we've all felt but never known how to say." Each word was a small light, a gentle affirmation that the path I had chosen was real and worthy. But the most unexpected moment came as I was packing up my materials at the end of the event. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see a woman I recognized, a quiet presence, who had always watched from the edges but rarely spoken. "I wanted to say thank you," she said softly, "for showing us that you don't have to be loud to be heard." I blinked back the sudden sting of tears, my voice a whisper. "Thank you," I said. That's all I ever wanted." That night, as I walked home, under a sky full of stars, I felt the gentle weight of what I had done settle into me. It wasn't about the applause or the small glow of recognition. It was about knowing that I had taken something he had once tried to make me doubt my quiet, deliberate strength and turned it into something no one could ignore. When I got home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights flickering like small beacons in the darkness. I thought about how he would see this if he ever heard of it, how he would probably scoff or dismiss it as nothing, but that didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't building this for him. I was building it for me. I opened my journal and wrote it out in careful, deliberate lines. He thought he won. He thought he had broken me, but I was never even playing his game. I was building my own. The words felt like a final truth, a quiet revelation that I would carry with me long after this night was over. The next day, I received an unexpected message, an invitation to bring my project to a larger event, one that would open doors I had never even dared to dream of. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, the quiet power of the moment filling me with a steady calm. This wasn't just a small step anymore. It was a doorway, a chance to stand fully in the light of everything I had quietly built. I knew there would still be challenges ahead. I knew there would still be people, maybe even him, who would try to pull me back into their games, their small, careful boxes. But I also knew that I had found something they couldn't touch. My own path. My own voice. My own quiet power. That night, I sat in the soft glow of my small apartment, the air warm with the scent of fresh tea and quiet possibility. And I whispered to the darkness, "This is my life, my story, my truth." Because he thought he won. He thought he could keep me small by making me doubt my worth. But he didn't see that I was never playing his game. I was always building something better. And this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed my small but powerful reveal, I felt the quiet shift around me become impossible to ignore. People who had once overlooked me now paused to listen. Conversations that had once ended with a dismissive shrug now opened with thoughtful questions and curious eyes. It was as if the quiet strength I had carried for so long was finally visible to everyone else. At first, it felt strange, like stepping into a room I had only ever peered into from the outside. I moved carefully, not out of fear, but out of a deep respect for the fragile newness of it all. For the first time, I was building something in the open, no longer just for myself, but for the people who had always seen me as more than the shadows he had tried to keep me in. One morning, as I walked through the small coffee shop I had come to love, the owner paused to smile at me. "I heard about your project," she said softly. "It's inspiring what you're doing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words settled in my chest like a quiet benediction, a small light I carried with me as I moved through the day. At work, the changes were even more profound. I was no longer the quiet presence in the corner, the one everyone forgot to ask for input. My voice became part of the conversation, my ideas no longer brushed aside. And each time someone turned to me with a question or a thoughtful nod, I felt the quiet power of that recognition settle a little deeper in my bones. But the greatest acknowledgement came from within. Late at night, when the city had quieted and the world outside my window was soft and dark, I would sit with my journal open and write out the small truths that had become the foundation of my life. "You are enough," I wrote. "You have always been enough, and no one else gets to decide that for you." He reached out to me again, of course. It was inevitable. A carefully worded email full of polite curiosity and thinly veiled condescension. "I see you've been busy," he wrote. "I hope you're not overextending yourself. It's a lot to take on, you know." I read his words twice, the old ache of doubt stirring at the edges of my mind. But it didn't settle in, because I knew the truth now. I wasn't overextending myself. I was growing. I didn't reply to him. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any argument, more powerful than any explanation. Because he still thought this was a game, a performance for his benefit. He didn't understand that I wasn't playing at all. I was building something real, and it had nothing to do with him. One afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting, a colleague pulled me aside. "I just wanted to say, you've changed," she said softly. "It's like you're brighter, stronger. It's inspiring." I felt my throat tighten, but I managed a small smile. "Thank you," I said. It's been a long time coming." And it had. Every quiet step, every small act of faith in myself had brought me to this moment, and I was done pretending it was anything less than exactly what it was, a testament to the quiet power I had always carried. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the soft glow of the city lights painting the darkness in gold. I thought about all the ways he had tried to keep me small, his carefully chosen words, his quiet manipulations. And I thought about how far I had come from the woman who had once measured her worth by his approval. I opened my journal and wrote it out in neat, careful script. His voice doesn't matter anymore. Mine does. The words felt final, like a gentle closing of a door that had always been slightly ajar in the back of my mind. The next morning, I woke early and went for a long walk. The world was soft and green, with the newness of spring, the air fresh and full of promise. I let my steps carry me forward, each one a quiet affirmation that I was no longer standing in the shadow of his doubt. When I returned home, I found an invitation waiting in my inbox, a chance to speak at an even larger event, one that would bring my work to a wider audience than I had ever dared to imagine. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, the weight of them settling in my chest like a quiet promise. I didn't know what would come of it, but I knew I was ready to find out. Because he thought he won. He thought he could keep me small by making me doubt my worth. But he didn't understand that the game he was playing was never the one that mattered. And now, for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. That night, as I turned off the light and let the quiet of the night wrap around me, I whispered to the darkness, "You were never my finish line." And in that whisper, I felt the quiet power of everything I had built settle deep into my bones. This was my acknowledgement, my quiet triumph, and it was only the beginning. The morning of my biggest presentation yet, the city was alive with a quiet hum that felt almost like anticipation. I woke before the sun, the sky still wrapped in soft blue darkness, and sat by the window with my coffee, watching the first hints of light creep over the rooftops. My heart was steady, my breath calm, and for the first time, there was no whisper of doubt in my mind. I dressed simply in clothes that made me feel strong and comfortable, no more trying to fit someone else's vision of what I should look like. I took a last look in the mirror, not for approval, but as a gentle acknowledgement of the woman staring back at me. She looked calm, she looked sure, she looked free. At the venue, the air was thick with quiet energy, the kind that comes when something real is about to be shared. As I walked through the doors, I felt every step like an affirmation of my own worth, my own story. No one else could write it for me, and no one else could take it away. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front of the room, with my head held high, the weight of the moment settling around me like a soft cloak. I took a slow breath and let the hush of the room settle into my bones. And then I began. I didn't speak to impress them. I didn't speak to prove him wrong. I spoke to tell the truth, the quiet, steady truth of how I had chosen to stop playing his game and start building my own. I shared the small victories, the long nights, the gentle power of choosing my own path, even when the world tried to pull me back into someone else's. And as I spoke, I felt the room lean in the quiet rhythm of their breath, matching mine. When I finished, there was a moment of stillness, soft and golden, and then the room erupted in gentle applause, warm and real. I smiled not for them, but for me, because I knew in that moment that this was my final word. I had never been playing. I had always been building. Afterward, people came up to me one by one, their words soft and sincere. "Thank you for sharing," one woman said. It's like you gave a voice to something we've all felt." Another added quietly, "You didn't just speak, you showed us how to stand." Each word was a small light, a quiet confirmation of everything I had fought to believe about myself, and I held each one close, letting them settle into the spaces where his voice used to echo. Later, as the last of the guests drifted away, I stood by the tall windows, the city lights flickering in the twilight. I thought about all the times he had tried to make me small, all the ways he had measured me against his own fragile pride. And I realized with a soft smile that I had finally stepped beyond the reach of his voice. He thought he won. He thought he had broken me. But he didn't know that I was never even playing. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine, the rich red glow catching the soft light of my small apartment. I sat by the window, the cool breeze carrying the scent of spring, and let myself breathe. Really breathe. Because I knew now that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. My worth wasn't a prize to be won in someone else's game. It was mine. And it always had been. I opened my journal one last time and wrote it out in careful, deliberate letters I was never playing. I was always building. The words felt final, like the last note of a song that had been playing in the back of my mind for years. As I turned off the light and let the night wrap around me, I whispered to the darkness, "Thank you for underestimating me." Because in that underestimation, I had found the quiet space I needed to build something real. The next morning, I woke with a calm in my chest that felt unbreakable. I walked through the city with my head high, the soft glow of the sunrise, a gentle reminder that every new day was another chance to claim my place in the world on my own terms. And if you're listening now, if you've ever felt the weight of someone else's doubts pressing down on your shoulders, I want you to remember this. You don't have to play their game. You don't have to shrink to fit their narrow view of who you are. Your worth isn't measured by their rules. It's yours, quiet, steady, and unshakable. So take a breath, take a step, and remember that you are more than their doubts. You are more than their limitations. You are enough exactly as you are. Because he thought he won, but he didn't understand that you weren't even playing. And that is your final word. Say,